Okay, so here's a quick intro to bees. I guess the first thing I'm going to say is you're probably a lot more scared of them than you should be. Definitely have a healthy fear or respect of them. But I mean, I can put my hand up here. You can see that there. I can put my hand up pretty close and kind of touch some of them, and they'll be fine with it. Yeah. So just be respectful. They will. Standing in front of the hive like I am now is not a good idea if you're going to be opening it. Generally, if you smoke it, most of them will go inside anyway. But if you're going to be doing any kind of work, you're going to want to stand here. That's kind of why we have person-sized gaps between the hives here. So these are 3 of the 4 hives we have. One of the principles of beekeeping is you're gonna you can keep them closer together than you think. These guys aren't gonna hurt each other. You will have on some occasions robbing, but that's usually when a colony is collapsing or extremely weak anyway. So rather than treating that as an aggressive hive, you should look and see why your colony is collapsing, and see why they're weak. They might generally they're queenless, or they've got really weak numbers, or they just swarm, something like that. And you'll see it. This is what normal activity looks like, and I'll zoom in on that while I talk about the next few points. If you see, especially if you have other hives nearby, if you see a lot of bees coming out with pollen, maybe going to some other hives, that's not good. If you really want to see only pollen going in, you don't really want to see any kind of pollen or resources or nectar or anything like that coming out. Most of these hives have vent holes in the top. You can see for some reason these guys are using that as a second entrance. It's not super common. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just nice to have guard bees focused, because they will specialize into tasks. It's nice to have them focused on one entrance. So if you can make sure that you introduce the bees through a certain entrance, then that's the way to go. So just some topics that are good to talk about for a primer video. Let's see. Well, number 1, the main thing is don't be so scared of them. They do hurt, but if you're just calm and patient and not too disturbing to the hive, then they'll pay you no mind. I guess the second thing I'll talk about disturbing the hive. Really, the major things that are going to cause bees to get angry with you is opening the hive or jostling it in any way. I will give a demonstration. As you can hear, that's a certain level of activity if I knock. I don't know if that's picking up on the camera, but they get a lot more noisy. They'll vibrate to kind of warn predators or anything that might be bothering the hive. Let's think. So yeah, don't stand in front. I mean, I'm standing in front now, but I'm saying when you're operating with the hive, don't stand in front of them. Don't make too many vibrations. So you can shoot a gun next to them and they'll be all right. Technically, there is vibrations from that, but it's not, excessive. If you're running a lawnmower, for example, we have a little bit of lawn here. If you're running a lawnmower along here, you will possibly attract some attention, especially if it's prolonged. But talking, I could, really shout, and these guys wouldn't really be any more bothered by it. Yeah, so let's think. The fear, and then something that might cause aggression. The other thing is, it's pretty simple. I mean, the principles, the reason why these are called Langstroth hives, these are 10-frame large hives. The other one that I'll show you later is an 8-frame, which is I think is the standard hive. But the reason why these exist is because they're easier to access than natural hives, and in the first place, they're actually human accessible, is the big thing. A lot of bees, especially these honeybees, will make them in hollowed out trees. It could be a living tree, generally dead trees that have large cavities and small openings, which we usually need a chainsaw to get into, but you can actually make natural looking hives out of logs and stuff and attract them. Anyway, to make a long story short, your skills in beekeeping are going to be useful in taking care of bees that you might find, like in a, for example, I'm going to try not to show the road too much, but in that barn over there, taking care of them and moving them, because with most pollinators, especially bees, you really don't want to kill them, even if they're in a barn or something like that and being a pest. It's best to move them if you can. And if you get good at finding queens and handling her well and learning how to move colonies via the queen, you can get pretty good at bee removal, which could be lucrative, but less, money's not really the object here. It's the saving the lives of the bees and, maybe installing them into a box you don't have. That's pretty useful. Anyway, we'll try and keep this short and sweet. Water. Most of the time they can handle their own water. For example, there's a puddle there from rain from earlier. That will be a thing they can drink out of. We also have this livestock pond, which the bees frequent. There's been studies done on, one that I've seen is a video on YouTube where a guy had like chlorinated tap water, distilled water, rainwater, and pond water. And he did a test on it to see which the bees liked, and from what he could tell, there wasn't a major difference. They can find most of it naturally, especially like with morning dew and stuff, but it's always good to have a water resource nearby. That is, several thousand gallons too much. You could really do with like a gallon jug, like a week or a month. But just since we have ducks, we've got it nearby, we thought we might as well put it close, just in case. The next major thing is pollen. If you live in an area where flowering is short and not very, like you don't have a long flow season, there's multiple flows, but what I'm trying to get at is if you don't have an area where flowers bloom for a very long time, you may need to plant a lot of them. Out here we just seeded this field out to clover. So there's plenty of those flowers. There's also, in fact, we'll go and look at this bush, or like tree. I call them bee bushes. I don't know what the genus is. I'll go and look it up. But these things are pretty good. What I'm trying to get at here is you should have an abundance of natural pollen and nectar, because each time there's a flow, a nectar flow or a pollen bloom, your bees are going to take advantage of that and produce massive amounts of honey and then go back to like a trickle of honey. And so each flow is when you're going to want to look into placing on supers, which we'll go back to the hive and look at the difference between supers and normal deeps. But these things, there are bees all over this usually. It's towards the end of the day, so not so much now, but anyway. So you've got two major differences of bee boxes for a hive. Generally, the average Langstroth hive is going to be either an 8 or 10 frame wide. That determines the width, because the frames are a given width and spacing. I'll throw the details up here of how wide each frame is and how far apart they usually are. These are 10 frame wides, and these are the two deeps. The deep and super determines how deep it is. So like a super will come up, I think, to about there. And so basically the deeps are where they're going to put their brood frame, most of their resources for taking care of that brood, and the queen, which would be like the pollen, like the raw pollen storage, and then a lot of their wintering honey. Any extra honey that they produce is going to be in your supers, and those are the things you can harvest for consumption. So generally speaking, you want to make sure that they fill the deeps before you move up to the super. And people talk about putting queen frame or queen cages, queen screens, which are like a long metal screen that is just big enough for worker bees to get through, and drones, but not big enough for the queen to fit through. And they're the equivalent size, not of the lid, but of a outline of a Langstroth hive. Anyway, people argue about where you should put them in the hive. Do your research. find which one you agree with. We usually just don't let them get up to the super. And here's a good example of... Oh, they've gone in. Sorry, there's a bee with a lot of pollen on its legs. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so we just don't let the queen get up to the supers. And so that way she can have as much brood frame and resources as possible below that. There's some, just went in, by the way, pollen. So she can have as much brood in the deep as she wants, which will later turn into... So they'll have brood. Once the brood hatches and it starts wintering, they'll turn a lot of that comb into honey storage. And, yeah, to make a long story short, they can do whatever they want with those. The supers are for the honey. So we don't let the queen up there, because all bees in the hive are laid by the queen. So she lays the drones, the workers, the guards, the, what do they call them, the mortician bees or something to that effect. Or the undertakers, is what they call them. And all the other variations of bees, they are all laid by the queen and taken care of by the workers. That's pretty much all the major stuff you need to know. The major implements you're going to need are threefold. Obviously the hive. Again, if you're finding natural bees, you don't even need the hive per se. But a good smoker is nice. You can just light a fire somewhere nearby and throw a bunch of green leaves on it. Make sure the smoke's going to them but not heating them up, and you'll be fine. But it's just a lot nicer to have one of the little accordion style blowers, because you can direct it right where you need it. Generally speaking, that will be your entrances. In a perfect scenario, single entrance, as this hive has showed. Not everything's a perfect scenario. Your second tool you're going to need is, they call it a bee tool or a hive tool or a frame tool. It's got multiple names. If you Google any of those three, you'll find it. It's essentially like half a crowbar. So you've got like a right angle and then a straight. And that's going to do three major things. Number one is going to pry apart your boxes, which is important because they will actually wax the inside of the hives, depending on where the comb is and everything. And sometimes they're very hard to get apart. So it's going to separate your boxes. Number two is going to pull your frames out. So inside these, I'll throw in a clip here of what that looks like. But essentially inside the hive you've got, in this case, 10 frames. In the case of the video, 8 frames. And you need to pry them out. And so that little right angle is going to help you get in there to pry them out without damaging your hive. And the third thing that is for scraping off the erroneous combs. Because sometimes they'll get a wild hair and build a little bulb off the end of one of the combs or on the hive, and it's just going to be in the way. And so it gives you a little chisel to kind of bang that off with. So yeah, you're going to need your smoker, your bee tool, and thirdly, beekeeping suit. Most guys who get really comfortable with their bees and have been doing it for a decade or more don't use bee suits. I wouldn't recommend it. It's always nice to just have one on. So I won't legally say... So to make a long story short, you don't absolutely need one. It just makes life easier. Because if you're nervous and you're potentially going to mess up, it's going to make them nervous and freak out and buzz around and potentially sting you. And that'll be the last thing I'll cover, is the stings. So there's a horrible stigma that, like, you know, where when one bee stings you, you know, basically you're fucked and the whole hive's coming after you. It's 50% true. The pheromone is going to attract other stings. The old adage of jumping in the water, definitely don't do that, because then they'll just sting your face. And, you know, it's going to make it hard to breathe and everything, and that's not great when you're in water. Basically, your best thing to do is to just walk away slowly. If you, like, run and flail, you're going to hurt bees, and the reason why that's a big deal is when they get hurt, they release a pheromone, which makes the attack even worse. So just walk away slowly, take the stings, you'll get used to them eventually, especially if you keep bees for long enough. Luckily, I haven't been stung yet. Fingers crossed that it stays that way. But yeah, they're a great little... I won't say pet, but a great little livestock to keep. They're actually pretty sweet. They'll buzz around you while you're working in the yard and things, and they don't really bother you. They just wonder what the fuck you're doing. I'm going to stay on here so you can see some pollinators coming in. Hopefully you can see those drones. See, I'll try and call it out when I see full pockets. Oh, there's one. Big yellow pockets on the side there. So, oh, one last thing I'll cover. just in the primer. The one thing that bees really provide is a shitload of pollination, obviously. Now, natural bees, which are sometimes called solitary bees or orchard bees, are a hell of a lot better at pollinating per bee. So about 100... Sorry about that. One of the bees landed on my neck there. So about 100 honeybees. And I've seen numbers vary on this, but about 100 bees of the honeybee variety are equivalent pollinators to one orchard bee. So you can actually make these little things. I'll insert an image here. You can make these little tubular hives that attract these orchard bees. And they are they're not carpenter bees, sorry, mason bees. And they are pretty good. They don't live in as large a colony, and so in theory, one of these colonies will do more pollination just because of the sheer volume of bees. During the summer, when there's like full populations, they can get up to like 50, 60,000 per hive. Anyway, the mason bees tend to live in colonies of about 100, and those colonies of about 100 will do the same as like a decently sized hive. So they're good to attract. If you don't want the work of these bees, the mason bees are a hell of a lot less work. You can just basically set up a house and they'll do the rest on their own. Yeah, so bees of any kind are good to have. Honeybees are nice because you can have carbohydrate storage for the winter in the form of honey. You can have alcohol in the form of mead. And you can have a good resource in the wax, which you can use for light, for candles, etc. You can use it. You can actually make gums out of it. They're pretty good, like chewing gums. Preservation with the wax for like cheese making and things is pretty good. It's just extremely utilitarian. I'd highly suggest getting them, especially if you're into any kind of farming. And you'll notice that any kind of crops you're growing will have a significant increase in their yield as well. So that was a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. Still just meant to be a basic primer video on beekeeping. And hopefully we'll do a longer, more in-depth one soon, where I'll actually like break open the hives with my dad, and we'll smoke them out and show you what the queen looks like, and show you the difference between like brood frame, honey frame, little storage areas. But yeah, so that's pretty much everything. Thanks for watching.